Welcome to Jackson's Rare Guitars. I'm Steve Jackson. I'd been talking about opening a store due to my collecting of guitars. I went travelling on the road in bands. I used to frequent the pawnbrokers and the music stores, whichever town I was in. And I started to amass quite a big collection, and as I'd find better instruments and rarer instruments, I'd want to move on things that were lesser in the collection, and therefore I was quite active in finding homes for other guitars. There was a spot going above the bass player. It was a small room, probably about maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, and at that time I think I had maybe 8 guitars, 10 guitars, 5 amplifiers, and that was the start of Jackson's. 1990, when I finally took his advice and moved this store from the little cubby house upstairs downstairs. In doing so, it really lifted the profile of Jackson's, and also it gave us a lot more room to work with and more staff, of course. So that was the start of the growth, and that inspiration had me really start to step up, treating it more like a business than a hobby. A year and a half earlier, we'd sent out a catalogue of Jackson's worldwide to every shop in America. That really helped. We had things like Les Paul standards in the catalogue for $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, and those guitars were really highly prized in America. I think all the guitars we had at the time, 5 or 6 of those Les Pauls, went to America. And then we started becoming a destination point for touring bands, Frontier Touring, and a lot of the touring companies had us on the destination map of places to go. And because Australia had so many great guitars that had been sent here from the 50s and 60s, it was like a treasure island for musicians. They'd love to call in and see what the factory had sent out back in the 50s and 60s, and they were things that America hadn't seen. They hadn't done the circuits in the guitar shows, they hadn't been in collectors, they hadn't been in major musicians' hands. So Australia was a great destination point for a touring band, and also Jackson's. Here we have what is called the Holy Grail of electric guitars. It's a 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard. This would probably be around about maybe the 14th Les Paul Standard we've had in bursts since 1988. Unfortunately, a lot of the bursts that we've had, I've sent them out of the country. They've gone to America mainly, just because of dollar fluctuations. When the dollar hits the mid-50s, and guitars are very affordable overseas, and when it works in reverse, if our dollar hits up near parity, then we can shop overseas. But yeah, this would be around about the 14th guitar. Something like 24 of them came to Australia, new, and some of them even sat in stores up until around about 65, 66. People just weren't interested in them. So shops like Harry Landis in the city, in Park Street, you could buy a brand new Les Paul in, say, 65, which would be 5 years old. They couldn't move it on, they couldn't sell it. And of course today, you'd love to walk into a store and see some brand new sitting on a shelf. This particular one, and it may be hard to catch in the light here, but this one has amazing bird's eye running through the top, and depending on what light and what angle, most of these guitars were plain tops with very little figure in the maple. This one has exotic bird's eye running through it. Quite a few have flame, and depending on the degree of flame or bird's eye in the top, it really affects the value quite immensely. a guitar like this that is plain in this condition could fetch around $500,000, maybe 550 or six, depending on how happy the guitar is, whether it's a good feeling guitar, it sounds good, if it looks good, if it's lightweight like this one. But once they get a degree of movement in the timber, which normally they use the term it's got wood, which this one does, they really climb in value. This one's currently valued at $750,000. Very original guitar. Everything on the guitar is original. It's in amazing condition. The guy who owned the guitar, he owned it from '69 and bought it into us. And so it was relatively a young guitar when he owned it. And they are the most desirable guitar on the planet, sound-wise, playing-wise, and also value as far as an electric guitar goes. They have the PAF humbucking pickups, which Gibson introduced those in '57. First on the gold top, which we have a lovely gold top here in the building, and then the Sunburst came out in '58. And from '58 to '59, they had a very large profile neck. This one has the big round, almost baseball bat type neck. And then they moved into a slimmer neck in 1960, which is more like the Jimmy Page model. His is a 60 slim neck. And they went to like a tomato soup, they call it, red round the edges. It was very bright, vivid red into a yellow top. So the '59s and '58s are more sought after than the '60s. The '60s is still a very valuable guitar. Well, I think one of the very interesting points in guitars is more and more so they've become an art form and treated as such, and to a degree very big on the investment angles, and more and more the original guitars and collectible guitars are in the sights of the investors. It started probably around about the mid-2000s, probably around 2004, 2005, when articles started to surface from the Robb Report and the Wall Street Journal and Forbes magazines on guitars and investing in guitars. There have been companies that had researched it for some time. The 42 Guitar Index had surfaced by then, which was graphing the top 42 guitars and following how their prices had focused in the market since '91, and investors were very interested on how they performed. And I think what leads investors into anything is the quality. When a lot of people want a particular item because of the quality and the originality, then that excites investors. Not so much to keep it away from the player, but to preserve the originality of instruments, because some of these need preserving. There's lots of original instruments that have been refinished, and therefore we call them player grade instruments. They're still of high quality, but when the original finish remains intact on instruments, then that really adds value. The first spike in the vintage market was caused by the Japanese market. The Japanese market decided that if it went into the vintage guitar marketplace and purchased many vintage guitars, it would serve them three or fourfold. In the first instance, it would push the vintage market up, which it did overnight, by purchasing mass amounts of vintage guitars from the American market and vintage shows. Secondly, it would raise the value of the replicas that Japan was making at the time, whether it be Tokai or Fender Japan, whatever they were making. Really, they could ask a lot more money for it if a Strat went from, say, $3,000 US to $10,000 US, which it did in '88. So when the guitars tripled in value, they could ask more for the replicas of those guitars. And then secondly, their investment tripled because they bought them at 3,000 and the guitars were valued at 10. So it was a great investment for them. And then they photographed the guitars and then sold back the public photos in beautiful glossy books. And so they made money out of doing that and igniting the collectible excitement of the guitars. Like it really, when you've got coffee table books of beautiful guitars, it really helps stimulate the market. And then lastly, they put them in museums and charge people to see them in their own country. Okay, let me show you around the building. We'll have a look at a few guitars. If you'd like to have a look over in this wall here, that's our jazz section. The Super 400 being, the top of the line jazz guitar from its day. It was called the Super 400 because back in 1934 it was $400. So you can imagine how much $400 was back in 1934. A lot of money. And Gibson named their guitars after their prices around that time. Like the J200 was $200, and the Gibson flat top J50 was $50, J45, $45, J35, $35. And that's how they came up with a lot of the model names, just on their pricing. Yeah, so that's a lovely 60 Super 400, a beautiful old Switchmaster in blonde in the middle. That's very rare in blonde. 3 pickups with a Bixby, and very similar to the one that George Harrison purchased from us back quite a few years ago. Very nice guitars. Along through the other wall here, we have a lot of Gibson guitars. The really top end ones we hide in cases like the 59, but there you have a Pete Townshend reissue. Normally associate Pete Townshend with Rickenbacker, but he did have a modified Les Paul with mini humbuckers. Beside that's a lovely old 59 Junior, double cutaway at 17,000. And a lot of our Les Paul late model ones have left the building. They're very popular guitars, especially second-hand. Over here we have the first of the reissues in a gold top. That's a 1968 gold top, and Gibson stupidly discontinued the Les Paul in 1960, early 61 for the SG shape, which is above the white and the black. And by 68, with people like Michael Bloomfield playing the guitars and Eric Clapton, they reintroduced the Les Paul as a gold top, and that's a 1968 first issue of the reintroduction. Very rare guitars, and that one's very clean. I'd love to show you this one here because it's one of the lifetime viewing. You very, very rarely see anything. Well, custom colours are highly prized and they are hard to come around in original condition. But seeing a sparkle like a Dick Dale surf colour, and this is a blue sparkle that has turned green just with the yellow lacquer on top. The lacquer, of course, originally was clear, and with aging it goes yellow, but they really used a big chunky sparkle in this guitar. And these finishes were outsourced by Fender. Fender didn't have the spray apparatus. They didn't have the tools to spray this type of finish. And so they used to outsource it to speedboat shops around the corner, and this is truly a speedboat finish. And it's really unique. I've seen maybe one other sparkle in original finish, and it was a 59 gold sparkle with gold hardware. And this is just a great example. It's so clean and so original that it's hiding in our collection. This particular sparkle came out of a Japanese collection called Tashimura. He had a big collection of guitars that was put together by Makisuda of LA, and this was part of the boom in '88 that I mentioned earlier. This is part of the Japanese movement on vintage guitars, and they acquired a lot in 1988, so this is one of those guitars out of his collection. Well, the store puts away a lot of guitars when it sees guitars. We're all collectors, and really the money in guitars is holding on to them. If we'd opened Jackson's in 88 and then closed the store in 88 but kept all the pieces, there'd probably be $5 million worth of guitars sitting in the building or more. Therefore, the money is hanging on to them, but as a business, our job is to move them through, to acquire them and find homes. And occasionally, we're lucky enough to put a piece away like this when they come through. Of course, we can't keep them all, but when something comes through this rare, we can't pass it up. This is a 1962 pre-L series. And very, very cool. Of course, Dick Dale had a Sparkle, but it was left-handed, but a right-handed one will do us. Quite a few Fenders up through here, Stratocasters. Once again, a couple of nice, really old pieces, 1960, 63. And of course, the Hendrix style 71 up there with a large headstock. That's the Sunburst over here at $14,999. That's what I was talking about with the earlier large headstocks on the Strats. Whenever you saw that on stage, you knew it was a guitar made from 66 onwards up until 79. The famous Stevie Ray Vaughan, replica, of course, of his Strat, which was an old 61. And through here we have some really nice 75s, another reissue of a 50 Strat, of a Candy Apple Red. Of course, Candy Apple Red on a 57 Strat would be very rare if it was a factory original finish. It'd probably be around about $300,000 for an original one. To me, when you see these style of guitars, it's not only the art form of the guitar, but it's actually the sound of the instruments. Most major artists in the world would use instruments like this 59 Les Paul Standard or this old 62 Stratocaster, and even if they don't own them, most great studios worldwide would have instruments like these in their arsenal of weapons. You could take your own personal guitar in and record a track and it sounds good, and then you say, okay, I'm ready to go for the next track, and the producer will say, well, we're not getting the same guitar on that, here, use this old Les Paul. And then from there you're in trouble, because you'll want to try and replicate that sound live and you'll have to go out and find an old Les Paul. And so when you look at these shapes, this is something that, like an Eric Clapton, used the Les Paul, and Jimmy Page, of course, who we mentioned earlier. But there's so many artists, from the Eagles to Lenny Kravitz. Certainly anybody that plays that shape of guitar normally aspires to get a 59 or a 60 or a 58 from ZZ Top, or a nice old Stratocaster from once again Eric Clapton, to so many artists have made this popular. Even today, that these shapes are still extremely popular. They are icons, and even the guitar builders from Gibson and Fender are aspiring to make guitars that sound and play this good. And these guitars have set the benchmark. So in their own right, they're competition to what the makers can build today. They're trying to make something equally as good and sound as good to rival these guitars, and it's a very, very hard thing to do, because anybody that knows about sound and condition and feel of a guitar will normally choose one of these over a new guitar, especially budget permitting.